Hey, well, last week, Yvette kicked off our little summer series that we're doing called Hall of Fame. Now, I don't know, we're National Trust members, although we're about to give it up because we've not been to a National Trust property for over a year, and so I feel like it's time to move on to something else, and we'll just have to pay when we go to Clumber Park now, and hopefully we'll save money. But we used to, before we had naughty children or children that were misbehaving, we would go to these National Trust properties and you would go around the houses. And that's what I love, walking around the houses, imagining I'm the man of the, not the man of the manor, the lord of the manor, that's it. And I used to love looking at the paintings on the walls. Now, I am not an artist. I have very little idea about most things in life, and art is definitely something that I know very little about. But I would love it when there was all these family portraits on the wall going down, these history of people that have meant a lot to that family, that have established something, and they've done this, and they've done this, and they were famous for this. And I love kind of walking down these corridors, these Hall of Fames, as I would call them, looking at these people thinking, wow, and they'd taken the time, someone had taken the time to sit there, to paint them because they wanted that memory of them to be passed on to generations. They wanted other people in the future to know that we have what we have today because of what these guys did in the past. And in the Bible, the Bible's split into two sections. You kind of got the Old Testament, which is all the stuff that happened before the Christmas story, where Jesus came. And you got the New Testament, which is kind of all the story of Jesus, his birth, his life, his death, his resurrection, and then the start of the church. And a whole chunk of the New Testament is taken up by these letters that people wrote out to new churches, helping them get established, helping them know more. And one of these books, one of these letters was called Hebrews. We don't really know who wrote it, but in Hebrews chapter 11, part of that book, there's this Hall of Fame listed, these characters, these heroes of the faith, these heroes from the Old Testament, all the stuff that had happened before Jesus. And they talk about these characters and how they've added so much to what we now believe and what we now know to be true. And I think if it was good enough for the early church, if they took the time then to say, hey, let's look back at these characters again, we can look back at some of these characters as well. So that's what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. And I'm going to be looking at Abraham today. Abraham and all of these characters have kind of bits in common. They have their faith in common. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on, a little bit of the life of Abraham, a little bit of his faith this morning. And we've spoken and we've sung so much this morning kind of about, and Onki's already shared kind of this amazing man, Abraham, and the faith that he had to take his child up to the mountain, to be willing to lay everything that he had before God. But what I want to do now is look at a little bit of how did Abraham get to that point? Because we can sit here this morning or stand earlier with our arms in the air and say, Jehovah Jireh, you are enough. And we should do that because he is enough. But sometimes there's a journey to help us get to that point, to help us really know that Jehovah Jireh is enough. And I think that Abraham went on a little bit of a journey as well. I think if the first encounter that Abraham had with God would have been the encounter that Onki shared about earlier, then Abraham would have said, God, you're off your rocker, mate. Like, go away. I'm not doing that. But God had been on a journey with Abraham, getting him to that point. And this morning, that's kind of the journey that I want to look at and see actually, well, for our lives, what happens to us when we have the faith that Abraham had? What happens? What will our lives look like? Because faith makes a bit of a difference in our lives. And whether that's faith in God or faith in anything else, actually our whole lives are built around having faith in something. It's important to us. In fact, it says in the Bible we can't please God without having faith. Because number one, you wouldn't believe in God if you didn't have faith in God. But you can't live life without having faith. And so if you've got your Bibles, maybe a traditional form, maybe on your phone, whatever it is, you can turn with me to Hebrews chapter 11. It can come up on the screen as well, but if you've got it, you can follow along and you can make some notes. And this is what it says. Hebrews chapter 11, we're going to look at the section this morning that talks about Abraham. And it says this, by faith, and we'll just pause for a moment there, and we're going to look at this word again, faith. By faith, because everything that we do involves faith. If you've been coming to this church a few weeks, more than 3 weeks, you will have noticed that over the last 3 weeks we have changed some of our chairs. Not the ones you are sat on at the moment, although hopefully one day we will also change those chairs. But the ones in our cafe area at the back. Now, a few weeks ago, now, these chairs have done us very well. These are the old chairs that we had in the cafe, and they started off great. They started off strong, and they went underneath the tables, and they were lovely, and they were neat and tidy. But then over the last 8 years, what's happened is people have swung on them, Jewel, Jingo. People have stood on them. People have danced on them. People have thrown them. And over time, they've started to get damaged. And as you can see, the legs are no longer straight. They're wonky. And to sit on this chair here with wonky legs, you did not ever do naturally. Well, maybe you did, but I did not. When I approached this chair to sit down, before we got rid of them, I would do it very cautiously. I would not put all of my weight on it at once, but very carefully, I would lower myself down onto this chair. The weight would still be on my feet. And you can tell right now, I'm still nervous sitting on this chair because the reality is I don't have much faith in this chair. But then we changed the chairs and we got new chairs. And now I do not worry anymore as I sit down on this chair because I have faith in the chair. By faith, you see, and it's not just something that happens, but faith can become a natural part of our lives. When we don't think about it, when we just say, yes, God, I have got faith in you. I believe in you. And so we should move on, shouldn't we? Because we're still on the first 2 words of the thing. But by faith, Abraham, and back then he was called Abram, but that's a whole nother preach about why his name got changed. When called to go to a place he would receive later on as his inheritance, obeyed and went. So we've got this guy, Abraham, he lives in another land, and God's called him to pack his bags to go from here to over here, although I think it was a little bit of a longer journey from one side of the stage to the other. And it says here, he obeyed and he went, even though he did not know where he was going. And I love that. Well, I don't love it. I'm actually really scared by it. But Abraham goes to a place. He obeys and goes, even though he does not know where he is going. See, he went even though he did not know where he was going, because faith obeys God's call. And there's a few little bits that I'll just draw out of that line. Because faith doesn't follow our own dreams. Faith doesn't follow, it's not a blind stab in the dark. It's based on God's revelation, first of all. So God says, hey, we're going to go somewhere. And that was a word from God. Abraham didn't just pack his bags one morning and say, hey, I'm going to go over there. But God said, hey, we're going to go to somewhere which is going to become your inheritance. But he didn't know where that was going. And sometimes in life, sometimes as our faith is building, sometimes as we're on this journey with God, we don't always know the end destination. My wife gets incredibly annoyed with me most days, but there's one time when she really gets annoyed with me, when we go on a journey in a car. We load up the car, we get the kids strapped in, and we've got 3 children, and that's stressful enough as it is. The boot is loaded. The kids are moaning already. Are we nearly there yet? We are still on the driveway. We are not nearly there yet. One of them has forgotten their glasses. One of them has not been to the toilet. The other one is crying. And I'm so desperate to go, I put the car in gear and I leave. At which point my wife turns to me and says, Marcus, do you know where you are going? And I say, no. She is a planner. She looks in the map. She's there with her Google on her phone, looking at the route, looking that way's busier than this way. Whereas I just start driving and hope for the best. But I take this from Abraham because Abraham also did not know where he was going. So it's okay. And I want to tell you, sometimes in life, we don't know where we're going. And sometimes I get told off. Well, I always get told off for being unchurch leader-y like. The reality is sometimes we don't know what we're doing. I'm just making stuff up. So we go, not about God. Sometimes I'm not sure. Sometimes I don't know where I'm going. Sometimes in my family, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. And I think we all go through times like that, though. If not, it's just going to go straight down and you're not going to listen to anything more that I'm going to say. But I know that God has called us somewhere. I just don't know the way there. And that's what Abraham has in this moment. God has called him. He said, hey, we're going to go to a place that you're later going to receive as your inheritance. He obeys and he goes, even though he doesn't know the way. Even though he doesn't know the way. And maybe there's places in your life right now, and you know that God has called you to something. You know that he has called you to a place of fullness, of fruitfulness, of faithfulness. But you're like, God, I don't really know the way to get there. It's okay. Because Abraham, a hero of the faith, didn't know where he was going either. He didn't know where he was going. But faith obeys God even when we don't know the way. The journey might be hard, it might be rough, it might be confusing, but faith obeys God. And if we're going to get to the place, the faithfulness and the trust that Abraham had in God, where you could say, God, you are my provider. Actually, well, we're willing to take that first step. God, I'm not quite sure, but I believe that you're going to lead me anyway. I believe that you're faithful to me, God. And if you've called me to something, you're not going to let me go wandering off in the dark. You're not going to let me fall off a mountaintop because you are enough. And so let you just know that today, that God is enough, even when you're not quite sure on the road that you're on right now. So God, if you've called me to something, you're faithful enough to see me get there. So Abraham, he goes on this journey and it keeps on going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him by the same promise. Abraham, he made a home in an unknown land. You see, he gets to the destination, but he still doesn't know it. He's a foreigner there. And worse than that, he has to live in a tent. Now, I used to like camping, and I don't know why, and I'm sorry for those of you that have got your camping holidays booked this summer. My daughter wants to go camping. I don't like being in a sweaty tent. Maybe it's because I've got a small tent. Well, actually, I threw it away, so we can't go camping anymore. But it's not nice, is it? But Abraham not only is in a tent, but he's in an unknown land. And so Onki shared earlier, Abraham sees God provide as he takes this miraculous step of faith, taking his son up to the altar. But Abraham had seen God provide and trusted him before, enough to a place where he said, God, I'm going to leave my family, my friends, the land that I know, the comforts that I have, the things that make my life a little bit easier, my security. I'm going to leave that. And I'm going to go to an unknown land. And maybe as we're all on a journey of faith, God's call will entail some difficulties, some rejection, some persecution. I don't know what it will involve. But sometimes God calls us to live in an unknown land as foreigners. Here's what I do know, though. It's more dangerous not to obey the call of God than it is to obey the call of God. Whenever we go on holiday, like you see them, don't you? I go on holiday. When I go on holiday, we're in a foreign land. And I get really annoyed at these tourists, despite the fact that I am a tourist. You get on the bus, and we always travel around on bus when we're on holiday because the kids love it. It's like this a massive novelty for them. We get on the bus, we ask, we say where we're going, we pay the money. But usually we're stuck behind this other English person first who gets on the bus and they say, where does this bus go to? I want the other bus. How much is it? And it takes them 20 minutes. I'm like, flipping tourists. They stand out like a sore thumb, don't they? You can always spot the tourist. And let me tell you, the other people spot that you are the tourist as well. We don't have many tourists in Worksop. I'm not quite sure why. Oh, don't laugh. Tourists stand out, though, don't they? Because it's not their home. They're not used to the customs. And Abraham would have stood out a little bit. And I think that's okay. Because actually, we're meant to stand out. Now, Abraham, he made a home in an unknown land. He made it his home. He settled there. He knew his future was there. But he still stood out because his culture was different to the culture of the people in the land around him. Do we stand out from those in the land around us? And part of Abraham's faith was saying, you know what, God, I don't need to bow down to the culture of the world around me in this new place. And if you know the story of Abraham, he messed up a couple of times on this journey because he did try to bow down to the culture and he did try to fit in and he did try to hide who he was and who his wife was to fit in. But when he gets to this land, Abraham makes it his home, but he doesn't bow down to the customs and the cultures there. And you know what? We should think differently. We should act differently because our culture is different. Because God has called us to something greater. Our mindset should be different from those around us. And that's part of our faith-building journey. Actually saying, God, you've called us to something different. We are different, and it's okay to stand out. Now, I'm not saying go and be a weirdo. Like, please don't. But our values are different. We make different decisions, don't we? And it's okay to stand out. Because God will use the people that stand out. God will use the people that say, hey, God, you know what? Your culture is more important than the culture of the world. And so Abraham, he goes to where he does not know where he's going. He makes a home in an unknown land. And then it goes on. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. See, Abraham started to see what was not yet there. He gets there and he's living in a tent. And everyone's living in a tent. But it says Abraham sees, he looks forward to see a city with foundations, with buildings, where he no longer has to live in a hot, sweaty tent. He sees what is not yet there. And that's part of our faith journey as well. See, Abraham, he saw a home for his children, even though he did not have any children at that time. He saw a place of safety, a place of refuge, a place that would be a nation for the Israelites, for the whole generation, for a whole land. But it was not yet there. It was not there. It says in the Bible, it says, come to me. It says, ask, seek, and God will give you what you ask for. He talks about how this God is a provider, but first we need to align our hearts with God's heart. See, we might want £1 million in our back pocket, although I don't actually think £1 million would fit in these back pockets. It's quite tight, skinny. I was going to wear shorts today, but they're all in the wash. Don't know why I told you that. Just nudge my wife to get on with the washing for me. Ooh, she's not in here. It's all right. It's a test to see if she watches the recap on YouTube afterwards, isn't it? Anyway, back to where I was. Align our hearts with what God wants. See those things, we can quote those verses, God will give us whatever we want, and he is our provider, Jehovah Jireh, our provider. He is more than enough, and those things are all true. But first we take ourselves to the place where God is. And when our hearts change, our hearts align with who God is, then we have what is enough. He is our provider. But if our lives, our camps are somewhere else, then you know what? We're never going to know God as our provider because we've not aligned ourselves with God. We draw closer to him. See, so Abraham, he sees what is not yet there, but it's because he drew himself under the alignment of God. He said, God, I want to see what you see. You, the architect, the one who is going to make all of this. And so Abraham continues on this journey, and I just finished this little verse. For those of us that don't, well, it's not the whole end of the story. You can read it for yourself. It's in Genesis. So he sees this city with foundations being built by God. And by faith, even Sarah, that's Abraham's wife, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear a child because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so, from this one man, and he as good as dead. And I think that's a great line. He's an old man. People had written him off. He was past it. And you know what? Some people might have written you off because of your age. No one in this room, of course. Some people might have written you off because of your past mistakes, your history. Some people might have written you off because you don't feel like you're clever enough or you're good looking enough or whatever it is. But God sees past that. And this man, as good as dead, who others had written off, through this one man came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. Don't write God off because he hasn't written you off. He's not written you off. So we've talked and we've sung about this faithfulness. But how then do we get this faithfulness for ourselves? There's a clock on the back, just to give you a little warning. And that clock's there to help me know what time it is. But it's just reset itself. So I've got a whole nother 25 minutes, everyone. I joke, I'm finishing. I want to talk about how we have this faith. 3 really simple, really quick points about how we can get this faith. This is the hint mark. How can we have this faith? How can we have faith like Abraham? So a few things I've noticed. There's loads, but I'm just going to highlight 3 of them. You can write them down. You can apply them to your life. Number 1, faith is made stronger through relationship. Faith's made stronger through relationship. As Onki shared this amazing, dramatic, faith-filled story of Abraham earlier, trusting God to take his son up the mountain. It's because he had a relationship with God. If a stranger walks into this room right now and says, Marcus, I want you to give me your son. I'm going to take him away. I tell him to go. But you know what? If my mum came in, said, let me take your son off you for a while. You know what? Please have him. Why? Because there's relationship there. There's trust there. There's faith there. There's a long relationship there. And our faith grows stronger through relationship. And if you're facing mountains, if you're facing valleys, if you're facing a journey where you do not know where you're going, if you're facing living in a land that you do not know, turn first to God and build your relationship up with him. It's never enough. We never have enough of a relationship with God. For those of you that are married, you know what? We still get married and we still learn new things and we still grow in that relationship. because it's important. Faith is made stronger through that relationship. That's point number one. There's only three. Faith focuses on God's power rather than our inabilities. He promises he will do it because it's about him. It's about his strength. It's about him being Jehovah Jireh, not about us being the provider. It's about him. That's why we sung it earlier. You are enough. We did not sing I am enough. We did not sing Onki is enough. We did not sing Mark is enough. We did not sing my work is enough. We did not sing my finances are enough. We did not sing my health is enough. We did not sing my will is enough. We sang, God, you are enough. You are enough. Because why? We shift our mindsets and we focus on God's power rather than our inability. Write it down. It'll be helpful. Apply it to your life, because tomorrow morning something will come your way and you'll start focusing. Oh, I can't do this. I can't do this. Hey, focus on God's power, not your inability. It's a faith builder because it means we don't rely on us anymore. Last one. Then I'll pray. Then we'll sing that song again. Faith trusts God's timing. God promised Abraham descendants as countless as the stars and the sand. Promised a whole nation of people that would be following God, the Israelites. Promised Abraham, we read, the Messiah would eventually come from this line of descendants. Do you know what Abraham saw of God fulfill that promise? Nothing. Because he died. But he trusted God's timing. He trusted God's timing. Sometimes you might not see the complete fulfillment of the promises God has made. It doesn't mean that God's not working. It doesn't mean that God's not true. It doesn't mean that God isn't enough. Sometimes it may take a little bit longer than you wanted. Maybe, you want these issues to be fixed, these things to be resolved in your timing. But faith trusts God's timing. It says, God, I know I'm still battling. God, I still know I'm wandering around and I don't even know where I'm going. God, I thought I would have got there by now. But faith says, God, I trust your timing. And I'm going to keep on following you whilst I wait. Let me pray. God, I thank you that you are enough. That Abraham knew that you are enough. God, I pray that we would know that you are enough. God, help us to walk where we don't know where we're going. Help us to make homes in a land that is not ours. Help us, God, to see what is not yet there. As we make our relationship stronger with you, as we focus on your power, and as we trust your timing, God, I pray that we would become a faith-filled church, that we would be faith-filled people, so that we may see you establish your kingdom here on earth. Amen. Amen. Hey, we're going to sing and worship as we finish.